The presenting sponsor of Moon Tower Soccer is FVF Law.
To find out what makes FVF a different kind of injury law firm, you can visit fvf.law.
Hello, friends, and thanks for listening to Moon Tower Soccer. This week, we'll discuss Austin's loss to Sporting Kansas City. We'll cover some Austin FC news, and we're going to be joined by a very special guest. It is John Muller from The Athletic, and we're going to talk about whether or not managers actually matter. And he's bringing some data to support his opinions on this. So I'm really looking forward to y'all hearing that one. My name is Landon Cottam, and I'm joined, as always, by Mr. Jeremiah Bentley.
Hey, everybody. I'm Jeremiah Bentley. And Landon, I want to get at this a little bit because we don't talk a lot about show prep, but what does your average week look like leading up to Monday night?
Oh, so yeah, let's say watch the game, and then it's probably like 30 minutes to an hour of combing stats, watching press conference, that kind of stuff. Often another 2.5 hours of a rewatch, which is like pausing and going back and watching extra things and taking notes while I'm doing it. And then another, 30 minutes to 2 hours of researching the other stuff that's on there. And so oftentimes Sundays and Mondays are very busy. I imagine they're the same for you.
Very soccer focused. Yeah, they're the same. And I definitely the rewatch, I think, is the biggest part for me, because when I'm, especially for a home game, like if I'm just at the game, I'm just there for the vibes. And I have my instant fan reactions in the moment, and then I have to go back and watch it the next day just to see whether any of that actually makes sense or was true, or if that was just fan Jeremiah overreacting. And sometimes with games like on Saturday night, that becomes a little hard. And I would say this show is a little bit more of a putting in the work and appreciating everybody that supports us on Patreon that makes it worthwhile show than let's rewatch it because it's fun kind of show. But
also, I can understand if y'all, we're not going to spend a ton of time on the game, to be honest, but this interview with John Muller is excellent. We actually just finished recording it. Y'all are really going to want to hear that. So definitely stick around to hear that. And I think it's especially applicable to Austin FC at this moment, with all of the, just the attitude around the fan base at the moment as to what changes they think need to happen at the club. I think this interview sheds some light onto what research shows. And whatever changes the fans want would actually be helpful or not.
Yeah. So not to give it away, but if you're looking for a quick fix, there's probably not one coming right down the road. But let's go ahead and get into some news. I think the biggest piece of news, this is breaking as recently as tonight, is that Alexander Radovanovic is out. Not only do we believe that his loan won't be extended, but because some fans got to check out the stadium and the locker room afterwards. Apparently he doesn't even have a locker anymore inside Q2. So not only was his loan not going to be extended, but apparently he won't be playing on June 21st or 24th, when he would still be theoretically in town and available.
Hey everybody, this is Landon jumping in with a quick correction. So we read some reports from fans at a fan event at the stadium tonight that Radovanovic's locker was no longer in the locker room. We Are Austin TV is reporting that is only due to the fact that Radovanovic was out for the last home game with injury. So we probably should have recognized that in the moment when we were talking about it, but I just wanted to jump in and let you know that part of what we just talked about is not accurate, but all of the stuff on his wife's social media is still applicable here. So just wanted to jump in and correct that. Yeah, so I think the initial info came from, I can't remember who it was, but somebody was posting online screenshots of Radovanovic's wife's social media being translated from Serbian.
Right.
It was I don't know what she said in the video, but all of the fans in the comments, because she's a social media influencer type. And so her followers in the comments were talking about how they were glad that they were coming back to Belgium. And I'm sorry you didn't like it in Austin, whatever. And so I think his locker being taken down is probably as much confirmation as we need at this point. Why do we think this is happening? Why isn't he being signed, or why isn't that option being triggered?
Well, I think it could be several factors, and I don't think we'll ever know the one. One, obviously them apparently not being super happy about being here, about being in in Austin, maybe not adjusting that well to the States is a thing. And if that's true, it's kind of problematic because it's now several European players at this point that would have had like family situations that have caused them
I
to
think
leave
that's
Austin.
another thing coming from his wife's social media is I think she expressed some dislikes about living in the US and in Austin.
Yeah. And then, I mean, he's played, I mean, there's the injury factor. Even when he played this last game, he was like holding his shoulder, and stuff.
Yeah.
So they've only had 312 game minutes to evaluate what to see, out of him. So, I mean, those are the factors. One thing you never know is like, is the next guy up already identified, right? Like the transfer window's about to open up. Maybe there's somebody that they want to use that roster spot on that's a center back. Because ultimately, the big thing is like we were just talking right beforehand. Even if Austin goes 2 center backs, they really only have one like healthy, functioning MLS caliber center back with him being out.
Yeah. Vaisanen, we got an update on him. Out for likely 3 months. He did not have surgery, but will still be out for the majority of the rest of the season, which is not great. And so, that leaves us with just Julio Cascante and Alex Ring. Again, Alex Ring, not really a center back. So I think that, like, I'm curious to, like you said, we may never find out why Radovanovic isn't staying, but the injury thing, I feel like that could play into it. Maybe it's he doesn't want to be here, and that's one thing. But the injury thing, I could see it being a situation where, okay, if this injury is going to be an issue long term, like the only reason we would sign Radovanovic right now is because he fixes a short term problem. If he's not available in the short term, then he becomes a problem. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, and so like that's a lot of money. I don't know how much the transfer fee would be, but you would guess like a guy of his caliber, his age would. Did we know how? I think he was making pretty good money, right? And
he was too. Yep.
So like it's the money we're going to be paying him, the roster spot, all of that on a guy that you're not sure can play next week. And so like that gets scary as well. And so it could be a lot of different things, but I don't know, like depending on what his health status actually is, maybe this is like if he can't play, if his shoulder is so bad that he's not reliable to go 90, then it's not a good idea to sign this guy.
Yeah, so it's a weird set of circumstances that leads Austin to be in this place because there's Kip Keller, obviously last year played not a ton of minutes, but some minutes at the position. Started the first match, you would expect to see more out of him, but now he seems to maybe never be like Austin FC first team potential again. Amro Tarek occupying one of the senior roster slots, now. So it's just like it's a weird situation with that, plus the Vaisanen injury that Austin is just so super thin there, and it just made this series of mistakes or misses or whatever. One possible, I guess, came up. Hope would be Austin FC 2. And did we talk about whether Mazzaferro that was actually just like online or somewhere, right? About whether Mazzaferro is an option?
Yeah. You're talking about Kip getting minutes. Like, I understand like why people want to see that, but Kip has not been the best center back for Austin FC2. Sal Mazzaferro has been better than him. And I went to the game this last week and was sitting with Mike Crignola, and I had never quite clocked this, but it was after the game and the players were all they kind of gravitate towards the fans there to celebrate with the fans after a win. And Mazzaferro and Keller were standing next to each other, and Kip Keller is significantly taller and larger than Mazzaferro is. And I was like, oh, okay. Like we were talking about like, why did a guy like Mazzaferro, who's I think a little bit younger than Kip, I think he played 3 years of college, and was not as highly touted as like a prospect. And you see that size thing, it's like maybe this has a little bit to do with it, but Mazzaferro has been not even. I was like, I would like to see more of a season before I definitively say this, but I've seen enough now. Mazzaferro is the best center back on Austin FC 2. And if I could move one of them up, it would be him, but he's not on a first team contract. And so like say we do open up a spot, I don't know that he's so good that he fixes our problem and steps right into the starting lineup. He definitely doesn't step right into the starting lineup, but if I had to pick one of them to move up and be depth, I would pick Mazzaferro, but you can't really do that right now.
Yeah, that's true. So, okay, so in that game, that was Friday night, Austin defeated the Whitecaps 1-0. CJ Fodre got assist. Was CJ, he was coming off the bench, right? Or did he start?
No, he started. He
did start. Okay. So Austin sits second in the West. Are there any other highlights from that match that you want to get into?
No, I mean,
like who Austin's best center back is? RCFC2's best center back is?
No, CJ Fodre has been good. Like he's often the tallest player on the field. And then often takes corners for us. And one of the corners he didn't take, Czech Torre took and played a really nice cross in. And it was one of those where like Fodre was like on the near post and just was facing the corner and just glanced it off the top of his head and it went in. It was really well executed by both of them. But a guy who I've given a little bit of crap for not being a good defender is Czech Torre. And he had a really good game the other night. Like he looks like a fullback now, and he didn't really at the beginning of the season. And so I think I'll give him a shout.
Yeah, and just overall, like, how's the quality of play? Like, I think we talked early on about what to expect out of it, and maybe that it wasn't going to be very good. Do you still stand behind that, or are they putting it together?
I mean, it's hard to say. Like that we're saying that in comparison to something like USL. But whenever they're only playing other MLS Next Pro teams, like it's hard to say like what's better or worse. But as far as what Austin does, they're a lot of fun to watch. As far as entertainment value goes, they're fun to watch and they play really good soccer. So, but as far as like the quality of MLS Next Pro, I have no idea. I think we need to like see some MLS Next Pro players play against some USL teams to see. But
and which probably MLS Next Pro never wants to see. Okay, so and the last thing is, I think they play on Sunday, right? Austin FC 2 plays at home on Sunday night, I believe, which is Father's Day. And if that's true, then I imagine I'm going to go to the game because I think that is one day where I get to pick what I do. I'm not certain that my family will allow it, but if so, like I'm probably going to be at that game on Sunday evening. So if that happens, like come check it out. And yesterday Sunday, I went to the Brad Stuver. Did a fundraiser at the pitch. And people could it was for a Val in Equality Texas, and people could like take shots on Brad for $40, which was super fun to see them do it on the field. But really, it's just like that guy is such a good dude because it was just like him and Ashley, his wife, and like she was sitting in the stands and talking to everybody, and he would like let all the little kids score on him, and even I guess some of the kids wanted to play goalie, so he like took shots right at them so they could save it, and it was just like I'm always reminded of how lucky we are to have him and have his wife here in town and in Austin and making a difference because the team is not driving that, right? They don't have to do that. They're just part of the community and wanting to make the world a better place. And they do so good at it.
Yeah, there's like a lot of stuff where like players are contractually obligated to do stuff. Like the Stuvers do this stuff because they want to 90% of the time. Like most of the things they're doing out in the community are not connected to Austin FC. It's just because they want to do it.
So it was great to see. Somebody's asking me today that I work with. They're like, well, so like, where are his handlers? I'm like, nope. It's like his wife is his handler, basically. Yeah. And like all the people who just follow him around. And like he made sure and said hi to Jackson because I don't know, they're bros now or something. But it was like a really good time. So anytime you get the chance to like hang out with Brad Stuber, be sure and do it.
And then one more thing we wanted to mention is Austin Rise FC played their first game last week and their first home game over this weekend. And so if y'all don't know who they are a WPSL club, which is a women's semi-pro team. They just started playing. They're playing in the Texas Triangle Conference, and they're playing home matches at House Park. And I think the tickets are very affordable. I know a lot of Austin FC folks, like folks from Los Verdes, from La Murga, have been going out and supporting. There's a member of La Murga actually on the team. It was actually a member of my.
I was going to say, you have a personal connection, right?
She got poached by the pros, so we lost a really good center back. I think she might still be playing with us a little bit. I don't know if I should say that on air or not, but but yeah, if you are itching for some more soccer, then there's another pro team here in Austin with Austin Rice, so go support them if you can.
Yeah, and just like with Austin FC too, like you talked about it, like the fans are showing up, and so it's a good time and a good environment, and it's affordable and it's family friendly. And and so you will enjoy yourself. So if you need more soccer in your life. Mike Corniola asked me if I was going to the game, and I was like, no. And he's like, oh, because you hate women. Is that why you're not going to the game? I was like, no, Mike. Like, I have to. He's like, defend your position. So just want to call Mike out on the show. Let's get into the first team game, the Sporting Kansas City review, which we will probably breeze through, I would imagine, and get into sort of like the bigger picture issues and where we go from here.
Yeah, and I partially we're gonna breeze through it because I don't want to talk about it, but also like I don't know that we learned a lot. Like that's often what I'm trying to pull is like what did we learn, what changed, what's different, and in this one it's like nothing really. Austin started okay, it kind of fizzled out. A goal gets scored against the run of play, and then shortly after that they fall apart, which has happened not just one time this year.
Right.
So yeah, it ended up 4-1. I think again, like I think Austin looked okay the first little stretch of this game. It wasn't amazing, but they looked like I think the first half of the first half, I felt okay about it. I was like, okay, I think we can do something tonight. And then after that first goal gets scored, we have one little flare up in the rest of the first half, and the rest, like after they get the second and then third goals pretty short after, it's like, okay, this is done. And there's still 30 minutes left of this game.
Yeah, this is a very, just statistics wise, this was sort of the worst of Austin FC, right? 64% possession. Shots were fairly even. I was surprised by that, honestly. I didn't realize, I don't know where Austin, I don't remember them taking 14 shots, but somehow they did. Shots on target 6-2, Sporting KC. Sporting KC ends up leading in X goals. So it was kind of sad. And I guess, do you feel like the weather I feel like Austin was affected. Maybe the way Austin plays is very much affected by all the rain. Because the balls were not doing what they're supposed to do in a team that's relies so much on passing and so much on precision in the attack. I feel like they're more affected by bad weather than somebody else. The
pitch was very waterlogged, and like a little bit of rain can make the ball move really quickly. But this was a lot of rain really quickly. And so you would see them as they were trying to play. We got to play in the media game. And, you know, like when you hit the ball in the wet field, it will almost like have backspin and like glide across the pitch. When they were playing the ball, it was rolling forward, and there was like a trail of like a wake behind the ball every time they played it. I'm not going to blame the loss on that, but I'm sure it did affect the way they wanted to play. Like a team who likes to play the ball on the ground, the idea is to play it quickly. They don't always do that, but whenever they got a chance to, that it was definitely making it harder for them.
Yeah. So I think lineup wise, not surprising, Austin goes forward at the back because they didn't have a lot of choices with that. So we get Stuver at the keeper, Gallagher, Radovanovic, maybe in his final performance in Austin, Cascante and Lima across the back line. Rado was in for Alex Ring, right? Wasn't Alex Ring originally announced as a starter?
When lineups came out, Ring was in it. And then just before the game started, they announced on the broadcast that Ring was a last minute scratch with a groin problem, which is the thing that he had to be pulled out of a few games back and then only played a half the game after that. And so it's a thing that going back to the center back conversation, like maybe we don't even have our second fake center back anymore. But Radovanovic ends up playing. Radovanovic looked like the shoulder was bothering him, and I might be wrong or might have been seeing things, but it almost looked like his shoulder was out of place at one point during the game, and he popped it back in.
It did, yeah.
And so like, that's crazy that it was playing, but I don't think he had a great game. And so maybe that was affecting him there as well.
Yeah, he made some individual errors. Then in on FOB, it was listed as a 4-4-2. So it's Diego Pereira, Valencia, and Rigoni, and then Triusi and Zardes up top. Is that legitimate 4-4-2 lineup?
It seemed like a very similar idea of what we were trying to do before, where it was 4-4-2, but like the wingers were pushed up pretty high when they could be, and then Driussi had some more freedom to move around. So he was playing almost like a second striker /10. So you could use a lot of things to describe it. You could even say it's a 4-2-3-1, but the idea was the attacking shape to be almost like a 4-2-4.
And then Yeah, the goals came, I guess Alan Polito scores SKC's first goal early. I feel like almost all these goals like kind of come down to individual errors from among the players, but this one seemed like 1-2 for sure.
Yeah, for the most part, I think this, maybe I'll change my mind as we go through these, but this one almost seems like the least individual error, and they get progressively more so. But this one is in the 19th minute. It's a recycled corner. Austin is under pressure, can't get the ball out of the box. A cross gets knocked down back across the box. Polito is there to finish it. And I think had he not finished it, they probably would have reviewed it and called a handball. And
sure looked like that, yeah.
And it would have been a penalty.
Yeah, they were calling for the handball while he was finishing the goal, or Kansas City players were.
Yeah, so I think Polito was going to get that goal one way or another on that one. The second one comes right after halftime. And this is it's a set piece ball from pretty far out. It's a really good distance just to kind of dink one into the box. Eric Tommy is a very good set piece taker, and he puts a really good ball right into the box. Polito gets a good jump. I think it was Zardes, and I can't remember who else was standing next to him, but we talk about how slow some of our players are. And if you watch the start that they get as they're starting to run into the box, like Zardes is a step and a half behind Polito by the time the ball travels a few feet. And so Polito gets a really good jump into the box, able to get one touch on it. When the ball is touched, Lima is out wide, kind of running with the ball. And when it gets the touch, he gives up, not realizing that there's a player behind him. And the ball falls right to Castellanos behind him. And I don't know that Stuver saw it either, but because Stuver started to come out and then retreated. But then even once the ball got a touch, he almost acts surprised to see the ball falling to another guy over there too. So I think Lima, firstly, fell asleep and didn't track that guy when he could have kind of kept running and just played that ball out. And then Stuver maybe gets caught a little bit off guard there as well and ends up in a goal.
Yeah, and I thought Lima had a pretty poor game overall. Like one of his worst performances. We've talked good about him a lot this year, especially earlier on. I think he was just bad.
He doesn't have mediocre games. He plays really well or really poorly, I feel. And I think that's been the case. I feel like season 1, he was okay a lot of the times, never the roughest spot on the field. And the last season and a half, it seems like he plays really well or really poorly. And I thought he was not very good the other night. Next goal comes in the 57th minute. This is Polito again. Kansas City break the press, maybe get a little bit lucky. There's a deflection that falls to one of them, and they're able to switch the field really quickly. They spring Liebold, the left back, into space. He gets an early cross off, and it was a really good ball into the box. He plays the ball right where it needs to be. So I'll give credit to him there. I also think Radovanovic, who is tracking Polito on the backside, maybe misjudges the ball a little bit. And again, this is talking about I don't the injury maybe causing him to lose a little bit of focus, but there was a lot of little moments throughout the game where he did lose focus. And this was a big one where the ball's coming into the box. It seems like he's within range to be able to get a foot on it and do something. And he just misses it and falls to Polito, and Polito finishes it for a goal. Austin's able to get one back in the 68th minute. It's headed shot from Cascante off of a corner that gets deflected by the keeper. Zardes does well to retrieve the ball, keep it alive, plays it back into the box, and Driussi arrives really well to finish it. Arrives in the perfect spot, just nicks in right in front of a defender to get his foot to the ball, and finishes really well. But it's too little, too late at this point. It did not feel they were going to come back.
I know it was good to see. That was I feel like that was a 2022 kind of goal, right? He was right place, right time.
Yeah,
solid finish, but yeah, there's not a lot of hope.
Yeah,
once that came about.
Driussi gets another chance later on. I don't remember when in the game this was. I think it was later on, but I think it's off of a corner, a recycled corner or something. And Radovanovic takes a shot or does something and gets the ball, and then that falls to him again. And Driussi is winding up to hit the ball, and Radovanovic takes a slightest little touch, and Driussi kind of scuffs it and doesn't hit it clean, and it doesn't score. He would have scored. And that little touch from Radovanovic threw him off, and he missed it. So Again, I don't know if it would have mattered, but it's frustrating to watch.
And this last goal is Kyrie Shelton. So Kyrie Shelton almost had a goal, right? Did he score once and was called offsides?
Correct. Yeah.
Or offside? Yeah. And then he has this. The most amazing thing about this last shot is the X goal is 0.91, which I don't know that I've ever seen one that high. So yeah, good job on Shelton for converting a 91% chance of success.
Yeah, this one is started by a Danny Pereira giveaway and then is ended when Danny stops tracking Shelton. Shallowy takes a shot after they do some 1-2s up the field. Danny stops running after Shallowy shoots it, and Shelton follows up with an easy rebound and just punches it into an open net.
Yeah, so bad performance all around. It ends up 4-1. I don't know, to your point, I don't know what we learned out of this. I don't know what to take out of it, good or bad. One of the things, like, a lot of people had bad nights, but I've seen this criticism that maybe Brad Stuber's not really very good.
Oh God! Are you gonna make me talk about that Facebook post?
Yeah. I just want you to talk about that Facebook post because, well, I feel it's an insane opinion generally, but I feel like on a night when Austin gives up 4 goals, I don't remember the last time Austin gave up 4 goals. Like, it's at least worth some rebuttal of why Brett Stuber's really been pretty good, and this is not like all his fault.
I can't remember the name of the person who posted this to Facebook, which is good for them because I'm about to. I would have publicly shamed you if I could remember your name, but it's essentially they took like the last 5 teams in the league and were posting number of clean sheets and number of saves and number of goals let in, and none of these are really indicative of how good a goalkeeper is. There's one metric that is considered quite good at telling how good a goalkeeper is, and it's let me see if I can remember what it's called. It's post-shot XG minus goals allowed. And so the post-shot XG is how many goals you would expect the other team to have scored against this goalkeeper based on the shots that they had and the positions that they had them. And then the goals allowed is how many shots actually went in. And so if you just subtract those numbers, if you end up in the positive, then it means you stopped goals that should have been goals. And Brad Stuver is a +2 this season. He ended last season at a +4 and was top 5 in the league both conferences last year, is number 12 in the league this year. And so I think there's things to criticize about Stuver. Last season, he was a little loose with his passing. I feel like he's gotten better with that this year. I can only think of 1 or 2 situations the whole season where he's singularly gotten us into trouble with bad passes. Brad Stuver is a very good goalkeeper, and he's one of the best players on our team. Okay,
I wanted to make sure you got the chance to say that. For sure. Is there anybody?
Not to say he's perfect. He has off nights, and he has had off nights and misses saves. But if I were gonna do expansion draft protection, he would be one of the first 2 or 3 names that I put that stamp on.
Well, is there anybody else you want to talk about before we take a break and get into the interview?
No, we don't have to.
All right, let's do that then.
All right, let's set this up a little bit. So John Muller, writer for The Athletic, super smart guy, both with analytics and also just writing about tactics and a good storyteller. So I've been a big fan of his work. So really thrilled to be able to get him on. But he's done some work about whether or not soccer managers matter as it regards to the success of a team. And so very apropos of Austin FC's situation right now with so many people wanting Josh Wolff fired. I think this is just a good thing to think about as far as will firing Josh Wolff matter? How much has Josh Wolff mattered in what has actually happened? And I think John has a lot of really interesting things to say about that. So hang tight. We'll be right back with John Muller. When no one is around. Moon Tower Soccer is brought to you by our friends at FVF Law, the official injury lawyers of Austin FC.
FVF is a different kind of personal injury law firm dedicated to community, transparency, and client education.
You can go to FVF.law to find out what makes FVF a different kind of injury law firm and why understanding your legal options can dramatically change the outcome of a case. Amplify Credit Union is a member-owned financial cooperative that served the needs of Central Texans for over 5 decades. Amplify's team lives and works in the community, making them experts on how members can achieve their financial goals.
What makes Amplify different? No bank fees. Amplify is the first financial institution in Texas to put an end to bank fees. In 2022, Americans paid almost $8 billion in overdraft fees alone. Millennials paid an average of $336 a year in bank fees, which works out to about 70 of the beef tacos at the pitch at the little taco stand. You'll pay none of those bank fees with Amplify Credit Union.
Amplify membership is open to any Texas resident. Learn to trust your bank again at Amplify Credit Union. To learn more, go to www.goamplify.com/moontower. All right, we are thrilled today to be joined by John Muller. John, thanks so much for joining us, man.
Happy to be here.
So, John, you currently write about the Premier League and European soccer for The Athletic UK, but you actually not too long ago moved to Austin. And so were you in New York before that? Is that right?
Yeah, although I would say moved back to Austin. I lived here, 20 years ago and it was cool. And recently came back. And it's great to be back in Texas.
Yeah, so I've been following your work. I think probably I'm actually wearing a Total Soccer Show shirt right now, but I think that's probably why I originally heard your name, is because those guys were always finding like writers who were doing blogs and stuff like that. And that's like how you cut your teeth, right? It's just you started a blog and started writing, and then eventually people started paying attention.
Yeah, I basically came up into the soccer world through MLS, writing with American Soccer Analysis, which is a data analytics blog, kind of group blog that does a lot of really good stuff. I started an NYCFC blog when I was up in New York called The Outfield and worked with some guys on that. And then eventually, those were kind of pastimes. But about 2-3 years ago, I left my job as a lawyer in New York, started a newsletter called Space that did like super nerdy stuff. And The Athletic liked the nerdy stuff and hired me to do more of it. So yeah, now I do that mostly about European soccer, but I also write about the USMNT. Occasionally I'll get to write about MLS. I think especially this summer, certain players going to be coming to MLS that I'll probably be assigned to write about a lot. So that'll be fun.
Certain players, anybody that we might. Some big
name
that might come.
Maybe somebody you've heard of. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've randomly gotten to know your dad through Austin FC fandom. he told me that you've been flying back and forth to London every once in a while too. So you are part of like the Athletic UK office, not the US office. So do the UK office, do those guys ever give you any guff for being an American writing about European soccer?
My readers sure do, but no, I work with the UK side. We're a lot less siloed than we used to be, and the American side and the UK side are pretty well integrated now. But I've always worked with English editors, and I go over there pretty regularly. And no, they're very nice about me being American, except when I start telling them that Jesse Marsh is actually pretty decent at his job.
Well, I was very happy to see when you announced that you got that job. Like I said, I've been following you from various distances for several years now, and so you're like you said, your background is in like data analysis, but unlike some people who write about analysis like that, you're able to integrate it into a story that is bigger than just the numbers. And I think whenever I read something that is just so numbers and metric heavy, my eyes start to glaze over a little bit and I have a hard time following it. And the way that you integrate that into a larger story and like use it as just a part of the story and not only writing about the numbers, I find that really, really engaging and really helpful as someone who is eager to learn more about soccer. So thank you for what you do.
Thanks, man. Yeah, no, I'm also eager to learn more about soccer, and that's always been what drives my work. And I use data and film study and tactics theory and like whatever I can get my hands on that helps me kind of make more sense out of what I'm seeing. And so I'm glad that comes across and kind of helps other people get it as well.
Well, I was going to say, we didn't like randomly decide to have you on, but as you might have noticed, there's a lot of discussion in the Austin area about the coach and whether the coach should have a job or not have a job, or what should happen. And you've done some research into this, which is, do managers matter? Does the coach matter? And I think maybe take it a high level kind of what you've seen in the research, and we can dig into specifically sort of how this fits into Austin and maybe some insights that you have.
Yeah, so this has been kind of a hobby horse of mine lately, and it has less to do with coaches who I have tremendous respect for. Every coach that I've met, is a very, very hardworking and smart individual, and I think that they, put a lot of themselves into their jobs and know the game really well. But there is a lot of research on kind of trying to measure, do managers matter, and this comes from the business literature. It comes from baseball research. There have been decades and decades of this stuff, and soccer has kind of recently imported a lot of those studies, applied them, and found out that as best we can measure, maybe coaches don't matter, or at the very least, they don't matter in the way that we kind of talk about them as being the main character of the sport, as being the person who decides whether the team wins or loses. I think it's probably, when you take these studies as a whole, it's probably more like the coaches' marginal gains, marginal losses here or there. But what matters is having a good squad. And the reason that I harp on this so much is that I write for an English audience who is just really sold on this, like, manager is the main character thing. This goes back all the way to Herbert Chapman at Arsenal. England has this long tradition of making the manager the main character of everything. And I think that a lot of American sports do that too. It's we're not like super enlightened over here either. But I think that there's a lot of evidence that we can use from Europe and from MLS to kind of dig into what managers do and don't add to a team.
So I know that I read your story talking about this, and you cited, is it Simon Cooper that co-wrote Soccernomics? And I read that book a few years back and was very interested in this particular chapter. And they talk about how if you just like take wages throughout X amount of time, that it shows like essentially player wages in Europe decide which teams are good and which teams are bad. In a league like MLS, where the roster and salary rules are so weird and there is some like enforced parity, do you think that MLS managers have a greater influence than, say, Premier League managers do?
Yeah, so Cooper and Szymanski in writing Soccernomics make kind of the most basic, straightforward case against coaches being the main character, which is that if you average teams' wage spend over about a decade or so, and you average their points per game over that same decade, in the Premier League, which is very economically stratified, that explains the wage spend explains about 90% of the results. So that doesn't leave a whole lot of room for coaches to be this deciding hero. In MLS, that relationship just does not exist. Like the relationship between wages and results, it's just not there. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that, but they all basically come back to the roster rules, right? Teams are very limited in how much they can spend, which automatically enforces some parity. They're also limited in the ways that they can spend that money. And so a lot of the money goes to just a few players at the top of the roster. And when those players get hurt or, just turn out not to be as good as you hoped that they were going to be, suddenly, a lot of your roster spend just disappears down the drain. So I think that, we wouldn't want to take that case and say, well, MLS salaries determine who wins MLS, but we would want to look at that European evidence to say, we know that in leagues where, we have clear stratification of player quality, that player quality matters much more than coaches. So what can that mean for MLS? And I think that in MLS, that relationship probably carries over. That is, player quality is still probably the most important driving factor in this league. It's just that when you have these thin rosters that are very susceptible to losing players, in that sense, your situation is always going to be precarious. Now, does that mean that the coach matters more or less in MLS? I'm not sure, but I think that we have kind of anecdotal evidence. Like my favorite go-to is Peter Vermes, who, as far as I can tell, is a very good coach. He's been at Sporting Kansas City for like longer than you've been alive. And some years Sporting Kansas City is one of the best teams in MLS, and some years they're one of the worst teams in MLS. And it's not like Peter Vermes has changed. He coaches more or less the same way every season. It's just that the quality of the roster fluctuates, and sometimes they lose good players. Like Polito goes out for a year, right? And suddenly the team is bad. And so I think that we can kind of look at that and say, well, maybe the same thing applies here, right? In MLS, that the coach is not the determining factor.
I think that's an interesting point there, because you can say, like, every once in a while you get some teams in Europe and in England who do outperform their wages, but I think in those big leagues, oftentimes the wages are pretty consistent with player quality because those guys are coming from other leagues and being kind of passed up this system. And so if you're making a lot of money, you're probably a really good player. And if a team with low wages does well, oftentimes a lot of those players within the next couple of years, their quality has been realized. They will be making more money. And so MLS, I think, yeah, taking just like the fact it's not necessarily wages, but just player quality matters. And that is still true in MLS. And so I think you could say, yeah, maybe the coaching difference isn't that different.
Yeah, I think that's an important point to make, right? It's not that wages somehow magically win the game, and some people kind of facetiously look at the Soccernomics study and say, well, if you just pay your players more, then you'll win more, right? Like you haven't deduced which way causality runs here, but no, it's an efficient market, right? There's a lot of competition for these players, and like you said, if you have somebody like N'Golo Kante, outperforming all expectations when he moves from League Two to Leicester City, then he's going to get snapped up by Chelsea and paid a ton of money, and then snapped up by Saudi Arabia and paid even more money. It's eventually quality does get paid in Europe. Now in MLS, I think that the roster rules complicate things. Obviously, I think that also scouting is not great in MLS, although that's gotten better. But you have a lot of people kind of paying a lot of money on an agent recommendation for some player from Paraguay or something that they've probably not watched a whole lot. And you just don't know whether that player is going to be good or not. And so there's a lot of dice rolls in that roster rules framework.
So I guess the operating theory here is then that the sporting directors and GMs are the bigger factor other than coaches in this league as far as success goes.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think that we also have evidence here in MLS of some teams that have very well-run sporting departments, like LAFC, for example, has done a really good job of building an initial roster that produced one of the greatest sides that MLS had ever seen in 2019. They continue to be much better than their results for the next couple seasons, but they did eventually kind of tear down and rebuild that roster so that it looks very different now than it did 3-4 years ago. But it's still really good, right? And they got a new coach in that interim. Steve Cherundolo coaches a little bit differently than Bob Bradley. They have whole different players now, but I think that the kind of unifying factor between really good LAFC in 2023 and really good LAFC in 2019 is that John Thornton is good at his job. And when you ask around the league, like he's one of the names that pops, right? Garth Lagerwey is another one at Seattle for a decade. Now they also had the same coach that whole time, so Brian Schmetzer may also be really good, and maybe that's playing a factor, but when you talk to people around the league, it's Garth Lagerwey and Robbie Remen and I, who was his analytics guy, like they did a really good job of just putting together a really good roster. So it'll be interesting to see, does that sort of skill carry over to Garth's new job in Atlanta? Now in Austin, we had Claudio Reyna, who came from NYCFC, which was another club that kind of famously has done a good job of building a strong roster that they've kind of refreshed over time. But they also had kind of a really weak expansion roster like Austin did. And
also had access to City Football Group.
They also had access to
their financial backing's a little bit different. Yeah.
The financial backing's different, although, NYCFC is not a huge spender in MLS terms. And it's unclear exactly how much City Football Group, contributes to their scouting operations. I think that they've gotten more integrated with City Football Group over the last few years. And they've also sort of started to get more players from a South American pipeline that City Football Group has started to build. But really, I think that, David Lee and New York City seems to be fairly good at his job as well. I think that when you talk to people around the league, like there are certain sporting directors who they say like are a cut above, and those people generally tend to produce good rosters that kind of refresh. I don't think that we see the same thing with coaches necessarily. Like, I think that Bob Bradley did an incredible job at LAFC. Obviously, Toronto, is struggling to replicate that success, even with a lot of money on the pitch and Lorenzo Insigne and Bernadeschi and so on. I don't know. We can toss examples back and forth all day, but I'm more interested in these academic studies that I think kind of give us some grounding for the anecdotal arguments that we have all the time about, is this coach good or is this coach not good, right? I think that we have some real evidence on what matters and what doesn't.
Yeah, I think that talking about sporting directors, I think that there's like a lot of ire aimed at Josh Wolff. And like, again, maybe some of it rightfully so, but I think a lot of fans are really ignoring the roster build and maybe not like being a little too easy on what the players have done in it. Like looking at, and this is like not researcher analyst mode. This is like smart soccer guy question. Do you think a different coach does any better with this Austin FC team?
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear, from the large cohort of people who think that, Wolff deserves to be fired, what they would want from another coach to come in and, look at this same roster, how they would want this roster to play differently. I think that this roster is kind of built strangely. It's built around Sebastian Driussi, who's, a very talented player, but also sort of a limited player compared to a lot of other players in his wage bracket. These Argentine number 10s who kind of are a staple of MLS rosters for the last decade plus tend to be orchestrators, organizers, guys who kind of are the centerpiece of the team. And that's not Driussi. Driussi's more like a second striker type of 10, right?
Yeah.
He loves to get in the box. He loves to finish shots. He's really good at that. And, he does defend and he's a decent passer. He can contribute in possession, but that's not really his game. His game is to kind of get in the box and get these crosses. And so Austin FC has built this game that is just ridiculously cross dependent. This season in particular, I think that more than all but one team in the last decade, they cross more as a proportion of all their passes into the box, and they cross faster. That is, they have fewer final third touches per cross. It's basically get the ball in final third, pump it into the box, and then kind of hope that it bounces back out and you can repeat. And maybe that's just the best way to play with this team, where kind of your best player is a guy who wants to arrive in the box, and your second highest paid player is a winger who is supposed to be crossing the ball into the box. And Rigoni is not really kind of that guy who contributes a lot in possession either. So you've already got limited options, right? But I think that Austin's roster problems are also injury problems, right? Last season, they got very fortunate. They didn't kind of lose a lot of key minutes to injury. This season, they lost center backs right off the bat, which meant moving Alex Ring, who I think is the third highest paid player, right? One of their other key players, back into center back, which means you lose a key midfield presence, which means you're even more, again, reliant on that kind of push the ball out to the fullbacks, cross into the box, hope that Zardes and Driussi headed home. They also were like super dominant on set pieces last season, which hasn't seemed to carry over this season. I don't have a theory about why that is, but I'd be curious to hear, what you guys think.
Yeah, I do want to go back to the health thing, because I feel like it's specific to well, I guess my question is that specific to Austin. Like, Austin seems to be pretty good if everybody's healthy and really kind of bad if they're not. And like, is that common to the league? Is that one of these factors beyond sporting director? Is just like whether your team is healthy or not healthy is predictive because the league, there's so much parity?
So I know a lot of Austin fans are going to get mad at me about this, but Austin wasn't really that good last season either, honestly.
That's fair.
The results were good, but the numbers weren't. And I think that, if you were looking at the underlying numbers behind their performances, you're not as shocked by where they are in the league right now. But yeah, they were definitely better last season when players were healthy. And that's, again, common across MLS teams because you have these really thin rosters. They're very top heavy. If you lose, Driussi to injury for a while and you have to play Ring out of position for a while, like those kinds of things are going to mess up almost any MLS roster. It's very difficult to have depth, and Austin has, been very fortunate in some places on the roster. Like, I think Denny Pereira is a really good player and really underrated kind of across the league. I think, obviously Owen Wolff for his age is a tremendous player and, has a lot of promise, and they've gotten a lot of value out of those two guys. But they've got kind of replacement level talent at a lot of positions on the pitch right now, which just, I think that they don't have what the best squads in MLS have is sort of TAM level talent at almost every position, and then like a solid backup. And Austin doesn't even have that TAM level talent at every position, let alone the solid backups.
Yeah, I was having a conversation online with somebody today talking about I think it's like talent at LAFC or something like that. And like the fact that Ryan Hollingshead is not usually a starter for LAFC and would probably walk into our starting lineup on either side at fullback.
Yeah.
Like that's the, like, I know that like all we, like as fans, we all love our players and like fall in love with these personalities, but if you take apples to apples and really compare it, like that is the difference in a really good MLS team and what like Austin has right now. And like you said, like there's players who played really well last year that played poorly this year, and like I don't, again, like you're saying, the data shows that like it's very unlikely due to a coach. But like they're humans. Everyone is a human. Like there's a lot of reasons why that can happen, but it doesn't change the fact that like a lot of these players just aren't as good as some of the other players in this league, and that's gonna matter.
I think that MLS has always kind of had this sort of dynamic where fans watch their own team and don't watch the rest of the league. And hopefully that's changing this season. You know, with the Apple deal, it's in some ways easier to watch, although scheduling makes it harder to watch. But like, I hope that the league is moving in a direction where people will be more aware of, you know, the talent on all the other teams, because that makes it easier to say, like, not just like, okay, I like you know, Ethan Finlay or whatever. I think that he's a solid winger, but like to watch the wingers on 30 other teams, you know, or 35 or however many we have by next week, and say like, where does he actually, you know, stand compared to these others? And again, data can be useful for that, because God knows I don't have time to watch 29 MLS teams either. But you know, I look at how these players compare, and I think that, you know, Finley, Fagundes, Lima, even like a lot of the players who should be kind of key players with the way that Austin play are just sort of average MLS players at best.
Yeah. Well, before we wrap up, is there any other thoughts you wanted to get off your chest here?
Well, I think that we talked about the like player talent versus coaching thing. What we didn't talk about is the coach replacement part of the research, which is a big part of kind of what I've written about, which is there are tons and tons of studies from leagues all across the world that look into the new manager bounce, which I think is one of the reasons why we kind of are reinforced in our belief that the manager is a key person, is that every season we'll see some team that's struggling fire their coach, get a new coach in, suddenly they're good. And everybody says, well, like, that's clear evidence that this coach was bad, this coach is good. And it's very important to fire a coach when you're not playing well and get somebody better in. The problem with that is that like teams fire their coaches when they're on a bad run of form, right? When they're performing below expectations. And that could happen for a lot of reasons. It could be luck. There's a lot of luck in soccer. It could be injuries, right? Especially in MLS. But a lot of those reasons will go away over time, right? If you're just having bad luck, like, you'll regress to the mean. If you're having injuries, you'll get players back. And so what the good studies have done, what the well-designed studies have done, is compared teams that have fired their coach, not just before and after to themselves, but to teams that, you know, had a bad run of form in a way that would normally lead them to fire their coach, but didn't fire their coach. And what they find is that those teams also bounce back in the same way, right? So the new manager bounce is not a new manager bounce. It's a like team was doing badly and now they're doing as well as we expected them to be bounce. And the takeaway from that is sacking your coach doesn't make your team better. If anything, it makes it slightly worse, or has no effect across all these studies. Like it's kind of a net negative, if anything. And so that could mean one of two things, right? It could mean that managers don't matter at all, and you know, it's just the same players are there before and after the coaching change, and you know, a coach might make slightly different decisions, but really, like, if you're a professional coach and you've got this squad that you work with every day, like, you know who's good and who's not, and you have an idea of kind of how to fit the pieces together. And if somebody else comes in and looks at the same squad, like, they're probably going to arrive at similar conclusions and play in similar ways. Maybe they change one or two things, but if it was a close call, then it's probably not going to make a big difference, right? So that's one read on it. And then the other read is just that, like, okay, maybe it doesn't make a difference on average. Maybe some coaches really are like much better hires and some coaches really do deserve to be fired. But for some reason, teams just can't tell. Like, they just don't know when their coach is bad, or they just don't know like who's a good coach out there. And that's possible, but that would be very mysterious to me if teams can't identify coaching talent, especially with their own coach, if they can't know when he's doing a bad job and needs to be replaced by somebody who's better at his job.
I think sometimes also it's like there's like 15 to 20 players that you're rotating in. And if the team is bad, it gets to a point where the pressure gets so high, like something has to change. And it's easier to fire one guy than to fire 15 guys.
Yeah, and that's a key point that a lot of smart people make around this manager discourse, is that like even if the manager is like sort of a very marginal gains type of thing, he's the guy that you can replace at any point in your season, right? You can't replace your entire roster if your roster is the reason that you're losing. You know, maybe a coach like adds just a few points here and there, but I think that the trade-off then is stability, right? And if we talked about like the importance of building a good roster, then to build a good roster, you have to build a good roster for a certain style of play. And having one coach who kind of gives you that stability across seasons allows you to build for a certain style of play. And I think that there are a lot of benefits to just like have a coach who kind of keeps your team stable and then build for that, rather than replace the coach, bring in somebody else who wants to play differently. And now, you know, your roster that was already probably bad, like now you need to replace even more parts with it, right?
Yeah. So let's say, again, this is not, I guess you can wear both hats in this one. You are Anthony Precourt. You are the owner of Austin FC. What do you do with Josh Wolff right now if you're in those shoes?
I give him better players. I think that's the takeaway here, right?
Yeah.
My one concern with Austin's structure right now, and I don't know, how things have shaken out since Reyna kind of got left the picture, we should say. Like Sean Rubio and Josh Wolff are kind of sharing sporting directors' duties in some way. We talked about this a little bit offline. I would say that I think that there's a lot of evidence in this league that it's generally not a great idea to have your head coach be your sporting director as well. So if that's the situation, if Josh Wolff is really the one who's like trying to oversee the roster build and coach the team at the same time, like there are just common sense reasons why that doesn't work, right? Coaching is a hard job. It takes up insane amounts of hours, and so does building a squad. And it's just not reasonable to ask somebody to do both of those jobs that are both, important to the team.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right. Well, before we let you go, let our listeners know where they can find your work.
Sure. Yeah. Just search for John Muller at The Athletic. You can find my author page or whatever. I don't know if you guys can drop the Do Managers Matter research link under this or something.
Yeah, we can drop a link to the article for sure. And then do you want to plug your podcast as well?
Oh, yeah, sure. I also run a podcast with Seattle Football that, has been mostly dormant lately, but we're going to record this week, hopefully, called, what do we call it? Postscript Podcast. And we talk about, it's been literal months since we talk about the history of soccer analytics blogging and soccer tactics blogging, and sort of how blogs have been essential in changing the way that we think about the game. So if that sounds like your sort of thing, then check that one out too.
It's way nerdy. I listened to the first several episodes of it and I enjoyed it. So if it sounds like something you're listening to, you would be into, listener, give it a check. You gotta give it a listen. All right. Well, John, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been great.
Moon Tower Soccer is brought to you by Covert Ford. The Coverts have been meeting the needs of local car buyers for 114 years because of their service, financial expertise, and support after the sale.
In addition to supporting car buyers, Covert's an important part of the soccer community and an official automotive partner of Austin FC.
Right now, you can get a deal on a 2023 Ford F-150 XL Super Cruise, stock number 2230076. The MSRP is $53,815, but you can get it for a sale price of $45,299 plus tax, title, and license. You can also get special interest rates with approved Ford credit. It's 0% interest over 36 months or 3.9% over 60 months.
If you're in the market for a new or used vehicle, be sure to check out covertford.com.
Moon Tower Soccer is also brought to you by Sage Wilson Realty. Thanks to Sage Wilson Realty, we'll be giving away 2 tickets to an upcoming match. Fill out the form in the show notes to enter for your chance to win.
Again, this is made possible by Sage Wilson Realty. If you or someone you know are in need of Sage real estate advice in Austin, talk to our friends at Sage Wilson Realty. Be sure to check them out online at sagewilson.com. All right, we are back. We want to thank John Muller one more time for joining us and sharing his knowledge with us. Jeremiah, after the loss in Kansas City, I know like the Wolff out sentiment is as strong as it's ever been after seeing that loss, but then also after hearing what John had to say. Like, where do you stand right now?
Well, I think big picture wise, I kind of go back to what I sadly said at the start of the show. Is like there are no easy fixes, and now I don't believe that. I'm not sure I believe that changing the coach immediately is going to make a big difference. And I definitely don't think that now. We didn't really get necessarily into this, but I think it kind of comes down to like if Josh Wolff has lost the locker room again, like hire Davey Arnott as interim and figure out sporting director first. I definitely think the point that we got out of that interview is like sporting director is the biggest decision that the club has to make, you know, in terms of order and in terms of priority, in terms of what makes a difference. So it's like you have to give it to Josh Wolff through the end of this year, unless there's something going on behind the scenes that we don't know about.
Yeah, I'm kind of ambivalent about Josh Wolff at the moment. Like, I could take him or leave him, but like you said, I just don't think it fixes anything to fire him right now. So like, unless the players are done with him and there's like open distrust and dislike of him in the locker room, then I think like we need to wait until we have a firm structure above him and a firm plan for what's going to be happening going forward before we just start firing people willy-nilly. Watching the game in Kansas City, Sebastian Driussi looked really frustrated. One point was sitting on the ground while an attack was still going, yelling at the ref. I was kind of thinking like, okay, maybe this is the start of it. But then we got some quotes after the game that made me second guess that.
Yeah, so John Gallagher in the post-game press conference really talked about it being on the players, and I feel like he was specifically defending Josh Wolff in the face of what he knew was going to be the criticism that he was going to face from a lot of the fan base, and really talked about how it was on them. There's nothing the coach would do to make a difference. And then we saw Driussi today, I think it was today, on social, have another one of those like Instagram, it's us against the world, and keep doubting us, we're all together and we're going to pull through. So like the evidence we have is that like he hasn't lost the locker room. But I would say I was like super disappointed in seeing like Driussi like lay on the field and complain. I don't know what was going on there.
Yeah.
So I think regardless of the situation with Wolff, like that was not a great look for him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as like, I'm not going to, this is not a statement to defend Josh Wolff, but I think the fan base in general has been a little bit too, like, if you're going to be critical, I think they've been a little bit easy on the players, because there's a lot of individual errors in this game and a lot of individual errors in the RSL game. And all of the focus and the conversation has been about Wolff was like, okay, that's fine. But also our players are playing very bad soccer.
Yeah. And you could, I mean, obviously there's some factor. I mean, the coach has some factor in that, but there's a lot of individual mistakes. And ultimately, you know, maybe just the talent's not there, which means it's a bigger project and a bigger build than anybody really wants it to be.
Yeah. All right. Well, what does Austin FC have next? We don't have a game this week. We get a little bit of a break. But what do we have to look forward to coming up?
Yeah. So just a reminder, Austin, because this is the way MLS works, Austin's currently sitting in 12th in the West on 19 points. They only have to get to 9th to make it into the playoffs. And right now there's a huge group of teams. I think it's between 6th and 12th. Basically everybody from Vancouver, who's in 6th on 2022, all the way down to Austin at 19. We'll play again on the 21st, the 24th. And then right after that, the summer secondary transfer window opens. So it's July 5th to August 2nd, or when sort of Austin has a chance to make a difference in the roster. So well, I guess one thing before we set this up, and I'll ask you sort of what you think about it. Josh Wolff was asked after the match Saturday about whether we would be bringing people in. And he says, we got to do our best to enhance the roster. That's looking inside the league, outside the league. And it may mean we have to move some players as well. So I believe that we'll see some movement during this window. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like there's oftentimes when talking about like what moves we can make and what we can do, I think fans of other sports don't realize that you can't just like cut a player from an MLS roster like you can in some other sports. These contracts are guaranteed throughout the year. And so you just like keep in mind, this isn't FIFA. Like this isn't baseball, like where you can just like drop a dude to the AAA and just like whatever. So there has to be a market for anybody that we're going to let go. So we have one buyout. And other than that, we need to trade or sell anybody else who's going to leave our roster. And so whenever you start saying like, well, just get rid of this guy, I was like, well, if he's not good and hasn't played in 6 months, like there's not a market for him. We can't just get rid of him. Looking at the players who have been playing, maybe there is a market for, it's pretty slim. And then guys that we like would want to actually get rid of is another thing. So like threading that needle, the names that I came up with were maybe Nick Lima. Looking back, whenever he signed for Austin, this was never announced. This was, I think, before MLS started opening up and maybe giving a bit more info about what player contracts look like. Whenever we traded for Nick Lima, it was just this amount of allocation money. The player comes in on a multi-year contract. We did not get any numbers. His last contract renewal for San Jose was in 2018. So I'm guessing that when we signed him, he got a contract renewal entirely and added years onto it. So he's in his third year now. It wouldn't surprise me if was like 3+1 or 4+1. So I don't think we'd be able to trade him for a ton of money or for an amazing player, but he could be used as a bargaining chip or just to use to open up some space. So that's one option that I could see happening. Maybe Rodney Redes, now that he played some games and looked okay, maybe he bumped his market value a little bit there. Maybe some teams would be interested in him. And then the other one, which I don't know if would be a good idea, and it's almost certainly not going to be a popular thing to say, but Alex Ring. As far as like guys that we maybe could do without that have a market that maybe aren't super happy to be here at the moment, like I think he fits into that box fairly well.
Yeah, but do you think his salary is prohibitive on that?
Absolutely. Absolutely it is. Because I know that he's been like among Austin FC fans, he's been considered a bit of a hero this year because of like him moving positions, stepping in, and kind of like some pretty heroic moments in games. But as far as like his actual quality, where he is right now and his salary, he is still an overpaid player. And so trying to move someone like that on that kind of salary is going to be really difficult, especially if you're moving him within the league.
Yeah, that's what you get to the perspective of the rest of the league, where he means a certain thing to us that he might not mean to others. But
yeah, we're not going to have a lot of roster spots left. Radovanovic, if we get the confirmation that he's gone, he frees up one. We still have a lot of guys in limbo with Kolmanich. We can use his spot, but only temporarily until he's back. And so it's risky to use some of those. Gite is still on loan. He's not getting picked up by Ajaccio in France, but I'd be surprised if he came back, but like he still could. And so it's risky to use that spot until you have a plan for Gite. And so I know that they probably want to do some stuff this summer, but I think it's going to be hard. And this goes back to like the roster build, and like if guys aren't performing and you need to move them on, there's not a market for it. Like it's a mess. And so again, we can fire Josh Wolff if we want to, but there's a lot of mess to get cleaned up behind that it's not going to fix.
For sure. And I guess the positive, maybe the positive part of this is like, because Austin will be finishing our third season at the end of this year. It seems like there will be more roster flexibility in the offseason. And Austin rolled over 11 players during this offseason. There'll be more roster flexibility, both in terms of just number of players and roster spend, because we should have some fairly high profile, expensive players come off the books during this offseason there is during the middle of the year. So maybe the best hope is to sort of make some adjustments around the edges during the year, and like make a big push during the offseason with a new sporting director and maybe a new coach to really try to make a difference.
Yeah. Or if it ends up being Sean Rubio, just like him actually,
or him putting
with the freedom,
stamp, right?
With like the freedom to actually make decisions. Cause I would guess like while he is interim, if they have not fully put their eggs in the Sean Rubio basket, like they're probably not letting him just go out and spend as much money as he wants and do whatever he wants. Like there's probably going to be some limits on what he's allowed to do until he is like officially the guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's only so much you can do when you're in that position. So whoever it might be, get right, and it might be him. I think there's going to be a lot more clarity around it when we get to the end of the season, more than during the year.
Yeah. Let's finish on some good news. Danny Pereira is going to be playing with Venezuela during this international break. I believe he's already in training with the Venezuelan national team. So do you know what day that game is on?
So yeah, we saw that from our friend, Football Critic?
Yeah.
And those games are, I believe, on the first game's Thursday versus Honduras. And the second game's on Sunday afternoon. And we don't know. Do we know when we're going to see them? Or where we can see them?
I do not. But FotMob is your friend, and we'll tell you where you can find all the games. So.
Check it out on FotMob.
We also have Bobo Sibiarwanga from Austin FC 2, got called up again to the Ugandan national team. Look, Bobo is like, just based on how many Instagram followers he has and like comments on stuff that he's tagged in, I think he's like pretty famous in his region of Africa. So it's like funny to have this guy in the second. No, it's amazing. I love it. But it's just funny. Like, he probably has more Instagram followers than most of the first team.
Love it.
And then I think another thing of note is Gold Cup roster got released. There's a lot of MLS players on it. And so Jesus Ferreira will likely miss the game against Austin. Also, other players who are on that roster are DeAndre Yedlin for Miami and Julian Gressel for Vancouver. Those are all three teams that we play during the Gold Cup window when the players are going to be there. So we'll take what we can get at this point. If teams are going to be missing important players, we'll take it.
We'll go for it. We got to take whatever Austin can get at this point. You're right.
All right. Anything else, Jeremiah?
No, let's go ahead and wrap it up.
All right. We'd like to remind you to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Come find us online at LVRL87 and JBentley_ATX. And then check out the Patreon. I think I've sent out all of the current packages. There's maybe a couple that I'm missing, but most of them have gone out now. Let me know if you have not received yours. Send us a DM on social media, or you can find the contact page on the website and let us know, and we can make sure and get that taken care of. Next week, since we don't have a game and we all kind of need a little bit of a vacation, we're going to do a listener questions /AMA show. And so listener questions can it can be kind of what we normally do. If you have questions about the team, whatever else, that's great. Send those in. But we also want to do, like, if you have questions about not soccer stuff, about us personally, about the process of making the show, about anything like that, we want to answer some of that too. So we'll kind of see what the interest is and in what questions we actually get and adjust the proportions of those two categories. But yeah, we'll be making some posts about that, and that's going to be a good chunk of next week's show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week to preview the double Copa Tejas match week versus Dallas and Houston, and then possibly another interview, and then whatever news happens. Until then, I'm Landon Cottom.
I'm Jeremiah Bentley.
We'll catch you next time.
When no one is around.
Thank for nothing, you never.
La gente
Oh my God.